Good evening. I'm Eric Gray, and this is Unexplained. Tonight, we are reviewing the case of the Kentucky Goblins, also known as the Hopkinsville Goblins or Kelly Greenmen case, which was reportedly an encounter with extraterrestrial beings that happened in the community of Kelly, just 8 miles north of Hopkinsville, Kentucky, off Route 41, over the night and early morning hours of August 21st to the 22nd, 1955. This case is synonymous with the proverbial little green men, as this case popularized the term through newspapers reporting it as such, even though those who encountered them called them little silver men. This case is one of the most enigmatic UFO encounters to take place in the United States, and was one of the incidents reviewed in Project Blue Book. This case has several sources and sometimes conflicting reports regarding how many people were at the home that witnessed this event, and just how many little green or silver men were seen. It does appear that there was roughly 8 adults and 3 children present, and at least 2 of these little silver men. For making this video, I've gone back to the original newspaper clippings and articles that had come out at the time, one from Evansville Press and another from the Kentucky New Era newspaper. The case began when 20-year-old Billy Ray Taylor, a friend visiting Elmer Lucky Sutton at his farmhouse in Kelly, Kentucky, went outside to their well at dusk to collect some water. As they had run out, he looked up and saw something travel across the night sky, which caught his attention. When interviewed, Taylor described this object as a circular-shaped object that was extremely bright, with a trail of many colors like a rainbow. He immediately ran inside and told the others, which included his wife and the Sutton family and children, about what he had just saw. Taylor advised that he did not hear any explosion like a blast from the object hitting the ground, but rather a hissing noise. He believed the object landed somewhere behind their farmhouse. While I did not find it reported that he actually saw it land, but rather come down possibly in the woods behind the home, it was described as landing in a field behind the home in some sources, so perhaps there was a field that was blocked from being visible by some trees, which is typical of rural areas. This does seem to be confirmed by current Google Maps photos of this area, or what is now called the Kelly Station Park, which is near the actual location. You can see here the actual address of the encounter as it comes up in Google Maps. I was able to locate the actual address in this article, but it does not appear that any cabin still exists at this location, or it is just not pointing me to the exact place that it was. But the area is rural with many fields and wooded areas in between. Now, when Taylor went back inside to tell the others what he saw, they did not take him seriously at first, until they noticed one of the dogs began to bark. Mrs. Glennie Langford, who also resided at the home, advised of seeing a shiny circle hovering in the air 3 times during the night, around 7:30, 10:30, and again at 3:30 a.m. I'm not sure if this was before or after Mr. Taylor saw the object in the sky, as one report advised that Mr. Taylor saw this object in the failing light. So I would imagine this was around dusk, which would have been likely after or around 7:30 p.m. time frame. Mrs. Langford went on to advise that she saw a small figure that she described as being a little old man or monkey walking around her house. She explained that he was about 2.5 feet tall, maybe 3. The other witnesses, Mrs. Aileen Sutton, her husband John Charlie, and their 3 children, as well as Elmer Lucky Sutton, his wife Vera, Mr. O.P. Baker, Billy Ray Taylor, and his wife June, saw these small men. Miss Sutton went on to advise that she saw the first little man right after dusk that night. She advised how the creature looked, in her words, like it was made of aluminum foil, and it had 2 big eyes pretty far apart. She went on to describe how Billy Ray Taylor exited the cabin through the front door to get something, and a creature on the roof grabbed him by the hair. Mr. Baker then pulled him back into the house. Ms. Sutton was at the back door of the cabin during this, and the figure jumped or flew over the cabin. It then seemed to land in the backyard and simply vanish. Terrifyingly, Ms. Langford went on to describe how she saw one of these little men looking through a window at her. According to Ms. Sutton, Ms. Langford then fainted out cold when this happened. Mrs. Sutton explained that they had shot a number of times at these creatures. From the reports, it seemed like a number of times may be an understatement, as Elmer Sutton advised that he had shot at the creatures approximately 17 times with a 12-gauge shotgun, and that his brother John used about 4 boxes of 22 shells in his pistols. This is a lot of shooting. 17 times with a 12-gauge shotgun is a lot when you consider having to reload and fire, and 4 boxes of 22 shells, depending on how many shells are in each box. This could have been in the hundreds or more. Elmer went on to describe how the bullets, when they hit the creatures, bounced off of them as if like hitting concrete or pavement. He shot one twice that was about 30 feet from him with the shotgun, and it flipped over, falling onto the grass, and then just jumped up and ran off seemingly unhurt. He also described how his brother John shot one of these creatures with the pistol, and the bullets seemed to just glance right off of their bodies. During this time, both John and Elmer had positioned themselves at 2 windows in the cabin, and they kept the other women and children on the floor. During Elmer Sutton's interview, he described how they initially saw these little men about 45 minutes after Mr. Taylor first saw this object streaking through the sky. He advised how, initially, it only seemed to be one, but shortly after that, they seemed to be swarming all over the place. Now, I did read a report that stated even though the family reported many of these creatures, they never actually saw more than 2 at any one time. Some reports say 12 to 15, while others only 4. During Mr. Sutton's interview, he described these creatures to be approximately 3.5 to 4 feet tall, and that they appeared to look like the bones of a skeleton covered in shiny metal, and how their legs seemed to look like fluorescent lights flashing as they ran. He went on to describe webbed hands with claws and 6-inch long fingers with ears that extended to a point, and their eyes were approximately 6 or 8 inches apart, and that in his words shined like new money. It was also reported by the group that these beings had large round heads, very long arms that could almost touch the ground while standing upright, and long talons from their fingers, and that everything on these creatures seemed to shimmer and glow in the darkness. It was described that their eyes had a yellowish light, and their bodies were made of a silver metal. The firefight that ensued was described as taking place for a few hours. These beings would draw closer to them and then retreat during this firefight, as well as jumping up into trees. Finally, when the things seemed to calm down and these beings retreated, at least 5 of the adults and the 3 children got into their vehicles and fled into town to get the police. They pulled up at about 11 p.m. in 2 vehicles to the local police station. The police described how they were highly agitated and stated, "We need help. We've been fighting them for nearly 4 hours." One of the members of the group reportedly had a pulse of 140. Once the police were able to have them calm down enough, they began to describe the incident. The chief of police, Russell Greenwell, drove out to the Sutton farmhouse with 3 other city police. It was also reported that not only 4 city police officers, but 5 state troopers, 3 deputy sheriffs, and 4 military police officers from Fort Campbell showed up to the scene due to believing there was a shootout between townfolk. Greenwell later advised, "These aren't the kind of people who normally run to the police for help." This statement makes sense to me. A rural family in Kentucky with enough firepower to hold off a gang of aliens for a few hours does not seem like the group of people that are ready to run off and get the police. But back to the story. Upon arrival at the cabin, the police didn't find any evidence of quoted little silver men, even though there was no physical evidence of any extraterrestrials or UFOs. It was reported that the police had found spent ammunition, which was dispersed everywhere, and that the farmhouse's windows were heavily damaged, with the window screens actually shot through. There was a strange glow, however, found by the police, along a fence line nearby to the cabin. Just a bit of ground glowing. Now some attribute the glow that was seen to that of foxfire, which is an old folk name for a bioluminescent fungus that emits a glow typically found on decaying wood. In one article that it was stated that some luminous green glow was found near a fence, and this was attributed to foxfire. Now, one Kentucky police officer did believe their story. A Sergeant Frank Dudas, who was among the officers who had visited the farmhouse, also had his own encounter. It was the previous summer in which he had seen 3 flying saucers. He was quoted as saying, "I think the whole story is entirely plausible. I know I saw the saucers, and if I saw them, the Kelly story could certainly be true." It was also reported that the other officers were reluctant to give any opinions on the case. Like many UFO and extraterrestrial encounters, this one has been dismissed by most with other explanations of what could have happened. Some of the neighbors felt it was due to drinking excessive moonshine, but when interviewed, Mrs. Langford exclaimed, "These lies they told about us. They said we were drinking." I also read another report that the Suttons and Langford did not allow alcohol at their home, and that was not typical of them. It was reported that the police who had responded to the farmhouse agreed that there did not appear to be any evidence that they were drinking. It does appear that after this incident, the Sutton family did try to profit off of the interest of the story, and charged an admission to the farmhouse. Now, you must understand this, however. After this story hit the papers, the next day, Sutton's and Langford cabin was swarming with reporters and townfolk who wanted to come and see the location for themselves. Now, I believe the Suttons charged a fee to persuade people from not coming on their property. However, this did not last. With unrest with the neighbors, just 10 days later, the Suttons left the town of Kelly for good. I also found another report that the following day, 2 officers returned to the scene in the morning and were advised by neighbors that the families had packed up and left to spend time in Indiana after advising them that these beings returned in the early hours of the morning, around 3:30 a.m. This time, no one fired any shots at these beings, but they apparently scratched at the farmhouse and made noise of walking on the roof. Now again, this is where I find conflicting reports, because I've also read that a reporter named Joe Doris was there at the farmhouse the following day and met with Mrs. Langford, who reportedly was shooing away tourists from the home all day. Perhaps just some of the family left town and a few stayed. This does appear to be the consensus. This is a very famous case, and it's no surprise that there's so many different reports of what happened. This is also a fairly old case, being 70 years ago now that this happened. It's tough to say what exactly happened on this night in August of 1955. Of course, there's been many theories as to the explanations for what happened that night. As for the beings, most skeptics believe that the descriptions align with that of an adult great horned owl, which is roughly the same size and have tufts similar to that of the large ears described. And they're known to protect their nests when feeding their young and even attack humans that get too close. They're also known to hunt right before sunset, which was the time of the reported sightings. Now, I too live in the woods. While we do have owls, I don't typically see them. I have heard them, but I do find it difficult to believe that a group of people who live in the woods could mistake a large owl for that of these fantastic extraterrestrial beings. Why would several great horned owls start assaulting this homestead also? Usually wild animals want nothing to do with humans. Also, I don't typically see owls wear silver jumpsuits, glow all over, or sound like tin cans when shot. Or for that matter, just jump up and float away after being shot with a 12-gauge shotgun twice, and still come back. It seems like a plausible explanation for skeptics, but when you really think about it, it's an awful explanation at best. As for the UFO, well, of course that was debunked as a meteor or some bit of space junk coming down, which as we all know would land softly without any large bang and have trail of rainbows behind it. Which again seems like an unlikely or awful explanation at best, again. I hope you've enjoyed this case file from the archives. If you enjoyed this video, then join me next week when we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some recent information that's come out about this from people that researched it, ufologists, and interviewed some of the townsfolk, and also a police officer that has come forward from a nearby town. We're going to dive deeper in the next week or two into this information, so join me then. which may help to either debunk this or help support some of these wild claims. So we'll find out. Now, if you have any thoughts or ideas on what actually happened that night, or if you feel I missed something or reported something incorrectly, please comment below. If you'd like to see a specific video, please let me know in the comments what you'd like me to cover next. I have been your host, Eric Gray, signing off. Good night. Stay cozy, friends.